Canada. I want to start with Republic's relationship and your relationship with so many great Canadian artists. You signed The Weeknd.
Yep.
Your label has a deal with Drake.
Yes, we do.
Can you talk about just the Canadian landscape? It seems like we're in a very fertile time for Canadian artists.
We actually are. I mean, it's always been, because there's always been moments throughout the last 20-odd years that I remember. But for right now, I mean, if you think, three of the biggest acts on Universal Music Group, Drake, The Weeknd, and Justin Bieber, all Canadian. So.
And global.
Global,
yeah.
Absolutely. And we just did a label deal with XO, even though they're, a lot of them are residing in Los Angeles at the moment. They have Nav come, we just put a Nav mixtape out. It's doing amazing. And they very much are about supporting Canadian music.
Mm-hmm. Is there a reason why you think it's happening? Like we were kind of talking about how Toronto seems to be a hot spot. Some other cities in Canada, not so much. Do you think there's a reason, or is these things just kind of cyclical? Like we see cities that pop, and then they go back down, and they pop.
No, I think there's a real reason. I think Toronto has has a melting pot that is unique and unusual to the rest of the world. Even more unusual than New York, more unusual than Chicago, than London. It's its very own thing. And I think that artists here grow up, they're a little freer. I think, The Weeknd doesn't consider himself an urban artist. He considers himself a global, worldwide artist. And I think because of that mentality, they go on and they make music that's a little more free, that's a little touches on a lot of different genres, touches real people from around the world, more so than just someone coming out of Atlanta doing something very specific to Atlanta.
I want to talk about your background some, which is that you started as an assistant at $13,500 a year.
I did.
And would you recommend for someone who wants to get into A&R, just get your foot in the door of the company where you want to work, and then you can pivot and let them see your talent?
Absolutely. I mean, we still at Republic, we have a mandate. We do a very extensive college intern program. A lot of those college interns become our assistants. Some of them have even become A&R people in the marketing department, in the digital department. We're very much about growing people from within. And I think that is really, it's an industry that is not learned in school or in books. It's learned by experience.
It's the same theory as, William Morris Agency, everyone starts in the mailroom.
Exactly.
And you can end up running that agency, but you're going to start in the mailroom.
Absolutely.
And you just keep your eyes and ears open.
There's a chapter in the CAA book that came out, and it was all about, they modeled themselves after, William Morris, and they were taking these kids out of Harvard, and they were sticking them in the mailroom, and the mailroom back then was just driving scripts around town, delivering to, picking it up from a studio, delivering it to a director. It's the same philosophy. It's an industry that you have to love, and I think that I became a better A&R person because I did learn it from the ground up.
And you learn to do whatever it takes.
Correct.
Which I think is a very important lesson. I want to talk about early on, you signed acts like The Roots, Common, GZA. Can you talk about what you were seeing in these we now call them urban, or R&B acts, which I know you hate that term, which we'll get to in a minute. But what did you see in
urban alternative back then? Yeah. They were always slightly left. I grew up in New York, and I was working for Geffen at the time, and Geffen was putting its toe into urban music. So David, who was still running the label at the time, was very concerned about, getting in with gangsters or, bad situations. So I went about and said, okay, who can I sign to this label that this label would get? And the truth is, when I went to go see The Roots, they were so much more than just a hip-hop group. They were amazing musicians, amazing aesthetic, just, visionaries. And at the time, Geffen had Nirvana, we had Hole, we had Beck, Sonic Youth. And even though they were doing hip-hop, they fit into the music we were putting out. And one thing leads to another. So once I signed The Roots, Amir's like, you have to sign my friend Common. And then Common was like, you have to sign my friend Mos Def. And the next thing I know, I built a movement sheerly off of my own artists, really driving me to sign other people that were like-minded.
Is there a lesson there in trusting your gut?
Absolutely. You know, we still trust gut. You know, we have so much data now. There's data everywhere. And there's so many research records and so many artists putting out music themselves, going direct to Spotify, going to distribution companies in America like Empire. But you still have to trust your gut.
Talk a little bit more about that, because your bosses believe in research.
Absolutely.
And they believe in trusting their gut. But how do you balance the two? And what happens if your gut's telling you, let's do this, and all the research is pointing that it's going to flop?
You know, I think we've all been at Republic now since 2009. So there's a lot of trust in each other, and we do take a lot of risks. And if there is something that doesn't have any research to back it up, if it has negative research, then that's a different story. But if there's absolutely no research, we signed Julia Michaels. Charlie and I signed Julia Michaels. She was a songwriter. She didn't even know she wanted to be an artist. And to Charlie's credit, she was working on Haley Steinfeld. He came to the studio and he goes, Wendy, who's that girl? I go, she's Julia Michaels. She's a brilliant songwriter. He goes, no, she should be an artist. I'm like, Charlie, she doesn't want to be an artist. Charlie, to his credit, worked this girl for 8 months, and she finally agreed. And the first single we put out, Issues, just went platinum in America, just went platinum again around the rest of the world. So we're talking 2-time platinum. She had no virals. She didn't know how to make a video. She still is like a deer in headlights sometimes if she has to perform. But it didn't matter. Charlie and I believed in her.
Does she want to be an artist now?
Now she does.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
because
She didn't know she wanted to be.
I mean, I jump ahead to a question then, which is, you're as much a psychiatrist as you are a music person.
100%.
How do you talk to artists in a language that they understand? And specifically, you and I talked about a story about Ariana Grande, who you signed, who we'll
Yes.
talk some more about, convincing her to do the song Bang Bang, which she did not want to do.
That is correct. Well, you know, every artist is different, and I think a great A&R person approaches every project differently. No two things are the same. No two artists need the same things. Some just need you to be in the background and just guide them. The others need you there every day. So that comes with experience, learning the difference and being able to give them their space or be there when they need it. And in the case of Ariana, you know, we had her signed since she was 16, and we tried a lot of different styles of music, and the truth is her voice sounded better on urbanish leaning records. She was more of a Mariah Carey than a Katy Perry. But she didn't necessarily have pop taste in music and always shied away from what was her biggest singles. So in the case of Bang Bang, she really didn't want to cut it. And I said, okay, you don't have to cut it. In my mind, I knew the record was a smash. And as an A&R person, you never let a hit record leave the building. So that record was not going to RCA, it was not going to Epic, it was not going anywhere else. So I started sending it to some other artists, and I sent it to Nicki Minaj, and she loved it. We sent it to Jessie J, she loved it. So I cut both of them on it. And then when I sent it back to Ariana, I kept her voice on the second verse. All of a sudden, she got it. All of a sudden, she's like, oh my God, you're right, this is huge. So sometimes it's a little working in the background or behind their back to make it great.
Well, what would have happened if she had still hated it?
It would have came out on Jessie J's album.
So it was going to come out.
It was
Like you said,
coming
you
out,
were
no
not
matter
letting
what.
that song leave the
Correct.
building, and you were not letting it not come out.
Exactly. So we're animals. We never let a hit leave. And if she really kicked and screamed about being on the second verse, we would have put someone else on the second verse.
She would have regretted that, I think.
Correct. I think she still regretted it because in the end, it became a standalone entity, even though it was on her second album as a bonus track and it was on Jessie's record, but we also had Nicki signed through Cash Money. It became its own entity as far as royalties and how it was listed. So she never got 100% credit for it had it been Ariana featuring Jessie J and Nicki. So she learned a little from that.
It kind of became its own entity.
Correct.
Like you said, without,
Yes.
it had three owners. It had
Correct.
three parents.
Yes.
And You are actually the main parent.
Yeah.
Ariana was signed to Columbia before you signed her. Was there any hesitation, or do you ever have any hesitation in picking up an artist that may have been signed to another label that either got dropped before anything came out or something's come out and it hasn't worked?
No, actually, sometimes it's better. There's an amazing list of artists that were signed to labels, in the case of Katy Perry, twice before.
Bruno Mars?
Yeah, Bruno Mars, Alicia Keys. The list is endless. So that wasn't so much of a deterrent, especially because she was signed to Columbia through a JV they had with Nickelodeon, which she was on a TV show. She wasn't the star, she was the co-star. So it wasn't really 100% Columbia's fault because she was on a show called Victorious, and Victoria Justice was the star, who wasn't the singer that Ariana was. So if they couldn't get Victoria right, they couldn't put a record out with Ariana. So it was bad timing for her, and it was great timing for us because we needed a pop girl, and she had a huge viral following at that point. She did some Adele cover that had 20 million views on YouTube.
How important is that to you when you're looking to sign artists? What are you looking at? Are you looking at viral followings? Are you looking at number of Twitter followers? Are you looking at if they're getting Spotify playlist action? What indicators are you looking for?
For me, it's always case by case because I am old school and have done I signed the Roots off of seeing them play on a street corner in Philly. There was nothing even recorded. And we signed Julia Michaels just because we thought she was a great songwriter. But there's plenty of things we signed. The Weeknd, a great example. It was pre-Spotify, but he put out 3 mixtapes that were massive for free and was selling out 5 nights at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles at 6,000 seats per show. So, I just look for something that moves me. If it has the viral fall, if it has the numbers behind it, even better. But that's not the deciding factor for me.
You brought up that there's a long list of artists who have been signed to other labels, did not have success at those labels, and then ended up having success. Every great A&R person has an act that they have passed on that went on to be huge. Your bosses, Monty and Avery Lippman and I were talking last month for something, and they brought up that they had passed on Ed Sheeran, that they simply didn't feel like they knew what to do with him. Now they know. But at that point, they would not make that mistake again.
Yes.
What about you? You have a very famous artist.
I have a very famous artist, and he never lets me forget it, but he wasn't really ready when he came to me, probably too early. But yes, I did pass on Kanye West.
But you know what? It was not just because you felt he wasn't ready. You felt
Correct.
Your label situation was not correct. And that's a very
Yes.
important, you can love the artist, but if it's not a good fit for the culture of your label or where your label is, because you were at Priority at the time,
Yes.
right?
And we didn't have the resources to break him. And truth be told, it was a year and a half after that, and it had to be brought out by Jay-Z doing that. And then the world was ready for Kanye West. He was always a little different. But I always tell my staff, it's as important to understand the landscape of the label you work at, what the strengths and the weaknesses of that label are, and sign accordingly. Because the one thing, after you've been doing it as long as I've been doing it, that you don't want to do is also tie someone up. If someone's brilliant, but they never see the light of day, what good does that do for anybody?
That's one of the worst things that can happen to
Absolutely.
an artist. And we
I'm
all...
an A&R person, I think.
Why to the A&R person as much?
Because
you lose your leverage, or why?
I think that there's a human side to this business, and you become very close to all of the acts that you work with. I'm sure everyone in this room, and even if you're a manager of an unsigned act, you're close to them. They're people. And the worst thing you want to see happen is someone that you love not have the success that they deserve. So it becomes very frustrating when you have to give bad news to those people, and you want to do it less and less, which helps you then make shrewder decisions. Sometimes it's better not to, sign something. I think the smartest A&R people are smart because they know what to sign and they know what not to sign.
How do you navigate that within your label? You may feel incredibly strongly about someone and believe they're incredibly talented. Do you make sure, because radio is such a big part of Republic's
Yes.
game plan, do you bring in radio before you sign someone, your radio department before you sign someone? That's a little tail wagging the dog to me, but is that
It
reality?
depends. Charlie Walk and I are an amazing team.
He's president
Of Republic, but also is one of the most badass promotion guys ever to walk this planet.
really kind of legendary. It was at Columbia for years.
Yes, and it ran Epic. So Charlie and I work very closely together. So I don't want to say we test our records for radio, but we definitely share them. And we definitely go, and whenever Charlie's in town, I'll go with him to go sit with John Ivey, to go sit at AM.
John Ivey is a program director for Z100.
No, for KISS in LA.
Okay, well,
But that's okay.
Sorry, John.
So we don't audition the records, but it's always good to get feedback. And sometimes they come back with terrible feedback, and we put it out anyway. Cake by the Ocean is a perfect example where only Mark Medina at Z100 loved the record. John Ivey, not into it. And that actually made Charlie say to me, F him, we're going with this as a single. So, again,
big
it could
risk.
work, of course, but Charlie likes to take risks. We like to take risks.
Will you sign an artist if there's no clear radio plan?
Yes. Now, because of streaming, there's so many different platforms to get music out there. So in the urban landscape, and that's a loose landscape, it could be anything from backpack hip hop to, Atlanta trap music to grime coming out of the UK. There is a huge audience for discovery, and they are really streaming these mixtapes at big numbers. So it's changed a lot of the philosophy of something needed a hit single out of the gate to drive it.
How else has streaming changed how you do your job? Because we're looking more at a song landscape as opposed to an album landscape, and that affects everything.
Well, it's interesting. So it's changed a lot because one of the first changes, and this is a great example, when we put out Beauty Behind the Madness in 2015, streaming hadn't exploded yet. So it was a huge battle between Abel and I, where I always felt less is more. Let's do 12 songs on this album. He goes, no, I want to do 18. So I think we settled on 14. No, different versions, 14, one version around the world, because at the time, especially in Europe, we were doing albums and we were doing bonus albums or deluxes. So we had two configurations of Ariana. One was 10 songs, one was 16 songs, different price points on iTunes. And he said, no, the lowest I'll go is 14. And I'm like, okay, I can live with that. And of course, our international department, everyone was like, wow, can't we do a 10 song? I'm like, no, one version, no extras, this is it. So within a year, Spotify took over. Drake put out views at 20 songs, and it was massive. And in the streaming world, more is more. So when we started on Starboy, I had called Abel and I said, good news, how about 20 songs? And he goes, okay. So the truth is, in the end, it wound up being 18.
He got his 18.
He got his 18, ultimately. So that is one little way that it's changed a lot for that platform, album-oriented artists. It's also changed when we sign someone new, if they have music out in the world already, let's say they have a mixtape or they have an EP or they have something, there's a good shot that we just pick up that EP, put it out on Spotify, on all the streaming platforms, and then start to get to work on the next piece of product. So a lot of times, Monty always says now, the marketing meeting starts when the music drops versus back in the day, we would be out to radio with singles and doing all this big setup. Now, we still do that on a lot of our big artists. We wouldn't just put an Ariana Grande album into the world and then start working the single. But for new artists, it's the best way of discovery. No pressure, no clock ticking, no one's expecting anything, and you might get lucky.
We're going to open it up to questions after this last question. Speaking of The Weeknd, when Earned It was on 50 Shades of Grey, that's really, he'd been featured on an Ariana Grande song, which is kind of the first step to making him mainstream. But Earned It really did it.
It did.
Can you talk about the role of syncs and how vital they are in breaking artists?
They're incredibly viral. Viral. They're incredibly
Vital and viral,
vital.
hopefully.
Yes, vital. You know, we have this artist, Marion Hill. The album was out for 8 months. It got picked up for an AirPods commercial, played at the Super Bowl. All of a sudden, the single went from being number maybe 500 on iTunes to in the top 10. So one moment can change a song's, trajectory. In the case of Earned It, it was the combination of the Ariana duet, that movie having such a big profile. We were also doing the soundtrack, and he really wanted to be part of it. And the truth is, when we started putting the soundtrack together, he was really super underground. So they didn't know if he was big enough to be part of it.
The studio didn't want him, right?
They didn't, that wasn't their first choice.
Can we say who their first choice was?
Yeah, we lost him though. I had, even though he wasn't on the label, I had gotten Justin Timberlake interested, and then he dropped out 8 weeks before we had to lock the picture. And I remember saying, oh, let's try this song again. Let's try Earned It. We were cutting it for Beauty Behind the Madness anyway. It was going to be on the album. And then the director got a hold of it and just absolutely loved it. And the rest is history.
Definitely history. Great history. If you have a question, raise your hand. We actually can't see you. So I can kind of see you when I do this nerdy move. So there'll be a microphone coming your way.
Hi, great talk so far. I'm just wondering, for every Roots success, Weekend success, like how many failures are there? Like, do you cast a wide net in signing artists, or do you focus on a very select few and you just go all in on them?
It's different now. So because I'm also running an A&R department, as an A&R department, we throw a very wide net. Me personally, I now focus on, I guess, our A-list of artists myself. So the success ratio is actually much better. But as Republic Records, we do cast a wide net.
Can any label, though, really cast a wide net? Like when you and I were first coming up, and this is no aspersion on them because they were extraordinarily successful, but Atlantic Records was known as really just throwing anything up against the wall and seeing what stuck. And they had a lot of stuff stick.
Yeah.
No label can really do that anymore, can you? When it's $1 million is kind of your entry
It all
level?
depends. You know, we structure deals differently. We have a lot of different tiers of deals. Sometimes we'll do deals with virtually unknowns, get in super early, not a lot of upfront money, not a lot of stuff, and we'll put the music out and see what happens. If you wait and watch an act and sit back, all of a sudden, you know, these hip-hop deals lately have been especially in the States, have been absolutely insane. Rappers wanting $2 million for like one marginal maybe record. So, you know, we try to do a combination of both, but we like to cast a pretty wide net.
Saw someone.
Hi, Sarah Jane here. I'm here representing a band called Early Hours. You spoke a lot about, big names, big name acts, and I'm just wondering about the more developing acts that you've worked with recently and how that relationship came about.
Usually on the developing acts, someone who works for me will find them and I will let them do their thing and step in when as needed. So again, I'm not the person finding the baby band in the club anymore, developing them, growing them from 0 to 60. I have done that in my career and I'm obviously can offer advice to do that, but there's only so much time in a day, so much days in a week, so many weeks in a year, and a good executive, at some point you get to learn how to manage your time and where you're the most successful.
Is there an example, though? We were talking about someone who works under you who had brought in, I'm spacing on the person's name and the act.
Was it Marky Basie?
You can go with that one if you
Okay,
want to.
so
That
we
was
have
not
this
it,
guy,
but-
yeah, so a lovely A&R, great A&R guy for me in LA was on me to sign this other songwriter, Marky Basie, and he was from the Bay, and he had been signed to RCA years before when he was 17. And we just took a shot on him, and his first song did really, really well, You and Me. And I stepped in to finish the single. When we identified, oh, this could actually be a single, and both of them were looking at each other saying, well, okay, but it's not really there yet. I was like, okay, let me call my good old friend Serban. Let me, needs this tweak, it needs that tweak. Let's get G-Eazy on it. His manager also manages G-Eazy, so sometimes I'll step in and do those slight ever tweaks that make it into a hit single.
But can you talk about why it takes about $1 million to break these artists on that, just really briefly?
And it may not. That includes radio. If you're really
That
going
includes
for a top
radio.
40 radio push.
It really depends. It depends on what breaking means to you. So in our world, breaking means a #1 single on Billboard. That costs money for a myriad of reasons. Radio promotion, the artist doing promo, television show, platforms so people can see the artist, travel, A&R costs, video costs, you name it, they get associated.
So thank you guys very much. I'm so sorry we kind of started late, and because I think Wendy could give us advice all day long. But Wendy, thank you very, very much.